My stepmother and her children have always hated me, but when she found out that I inherited the inheritance left to me by my biological mother, she tried to force me to give up the property through slander and provocation. For years, it felt like my family, especially my stepmother and her children, had been waging an invisible war against me. The tension was palpable, but nothing could prepare me for what was about to come. My father's new wife, Nicole, and her kids had always made it clear that they hated me. But when they found out that I had inherited everything from my late mother, that was when things truly went south. I thought I knew betrayal, but nothing could match the cruelty that followed. My father, who had always been my rock, turned his back on me the moment Nicole discovered that my mother had left me everything. It wasn't just the material wealth that changed everything, it was the emotional blow. I was no longer a daughter in my father's eyes. I was a threat. To make matters worse, Nicole and her children, who had never liked me, suddenly treated me as an enemy. But what hurt the most was that my father, the man who had raised me, couldn't, or wouldn't, see the truth. He was blind to Nicole's manipulative nature, and my attempts to warn him only pushed him further away. It all started when Nicole came into our lives. My father had been dating her for about 3 years before they married. At first, I tried to accept her because I thought that's what my dad wanted, but I never could. She never made an effort to understand me, and I could sense that she viewed me as a complication in her new life. The fact that she had children of her own, an 18-year-old son and a 15-year-old daughter, didn't help matters. They made it clear from the start that they didn't want me around. It was like my entire family, the people I should have been able to rely on, despised me for no reason at all. My dad and I used to be close. There was no denying that. But ever since Nicole entered the picture, things started to change. It was subtle at first. My dad would spend more time with Nicole, and I would retreat into my own world, trying not to rock the boat. I knew he was in love with her, and for a while I tried to convince myself that maybe, just maybe, this was what made him happy. But then I saw the truth. Nicole wasn't interested in making our family work. She saw me as an obstacle, and her actions spoke louder than any words she could have said. She was always pretending to be nice when my father was around, but the moment he was out of sight, her true colors came out. I was no longer just an inconvenience. I was a threat. The more I tried to prove my worth, the worse it got. She and her children would mock me, dismiss me, and then play the victims when I reacted. But what hurt the most was that my father didn't see it. He couldn't see how they were slowly turning my life into a nightmare. Things reached a breaking point when my mother died. My dad, my rock, became consumed by grief, and that was when Nicole seized her opportunity. She moved in with us a month after my mother's death, as if nothing had happened. It was like she had been waiting for this moment all along. I tried to be supportive for my father's sake, but it felt wrong. How could I accept this woman who had never treated me like family, who had always made me feel like an outsider? But I kept quiet, swallowed my resentment, and played the part of the obedient daughter. For my father's sake, I pretended to be okay with the changes, even though my world was crumbling. It wasn't just her presence that bothered me. It was how everything seemed to revolve around her. My father's attention, his affection, everything I had once had, seemed to be given to Nicole and her children. The resentment brewed quietly within me, and I was forced to hide it, pretending to be a part of the happy family my father so desperately wanted. Then came the revelation that changed everything. 3 months ago, after my mother's death, we received a call from her attorney. It turned out that my mother had inherited a vast amount of property from her late uncle, property that she had kept secret from everyone, including my father. My mother had left everything to me. Every single thing. The house, the land, the money, everything. When my father found out, his world was rocked. He had no idea. Neither did I, to be honest. But what struck me the most was that my mother had kept this a secret, and now I was the one to inherit it all. It wasn't just the inheritance that changed things. It was the realization that my mother had chosen me, despite everything. It was a slap in the face to my father, who had always assumed that my mother's wealth would eventually come to him. But it was mine, all mine. The moment my father found out, he became distant. He stopped looking at me the same way. He had always been proud of me, but now, I was just a reminder of his failure. And Nicole? She was furious. She had been expecting to get her hands on some of that wealth, but instead, she found herself excluded. It was the first time in my life that I had something that they didn't, and they hated me for it. Nicole's treatment of me became even more hostile. She was cold, dismissive, and, at times, downright cruel. My father refused to see it. He was so blinded by his desire to keep her happy that he couldn't see how badly she was treating me.
It was a nightmare.
But what they didn't expect was that I wasn't going to back down. I wasn't going to let them push me around anymore. The confrontation came suddenly, a boiling point I hadn't expected. My dad was out of the house, working late, and my step-siblings were away with their friends. I thought I could escape the tension by going out with some friends, but that was when Nicole confronted me. She started yelling at me about my chores, how I hadn't done the dishes, how I was lazy, how I was disrespectful. I tried to stay calm, but it didn't take long for me to snap. She had pushed me too far, and for the first time, I fought back. Our argument quickly escalated, with insults flying and voices raised. And then, in the heat of it all, Nicole made a devastating accusation. She claimed that I had been pretending to get along with my father all these months because I wanted to keep the inheritance to myself, that I had been playing the role of the perfect daughter, so I could inherit everything from my mother.
The audacity.
I was stunned. I never thought she would go that far. But in that moment, I knew what I had to do. I laughed in her face, a bitter, almost derisive laugh. And then, in a calm voice, I told her the truth. Everything my mother had left was mine, no one else's. I could see the shock in her eyes as the reality set in. At first, she didn't believe me, but as the silence stretched, it was clear that she knew I wasn't lying. I left the house that night, needing space. I went to a friend's apartment to sleep, but the next day, my father called. He was furious. How dare I tell Nicole about the inheritance? How dare I expose the truth? He screamed at me, his anger making my blood boil. But I stood my ground. I told him that he had lied to Nicole about the inheritance, that he had claimed my mother's property as his own, and that I was done playing the victim. In that moment, I knew my father had made his choice. He had chosen Nicole and her family over me. I wasn't his priority anymore. But I wasn't going to be pushed aside. Not anymore. Nicole had made a fatal mistake. She underestimated me. She thought I was weak, that I would crumble under their pressure. But I was done. I had fought for my place in this world, and I wasn't going to let them take it from me. I knew that my father would never be the same, but I also knew that I had to stand up for myself. This wasn't just about the inheritance, it was about respect. It was about my right to exist in my own family without being overshadowed or dismissed. And in the end, I would make sure that they understood one thing. I was not a pawn in their game. I was the one who held the power now, and I wasn't going to back down.